My name is Sarah, I'm 27, and I'll never forget the day my own mother stood up at my wedding and shouted that I didn't deserve my husband. I thought the embarrassment would crush me, until my groom revealed a secret that stunned everyone in the room. This is my story. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories about family drama, betrayal, and emotional courage. The morning of my wedding was supposed to feel magical. Instead, it carried a heavy tension that I couldn't quite shake. I woke up before dawn, staring at the ceiling of the small guest room where I had stayed the night before. My hands felt clammy even though the air conditioning hummed steadily. I whispered to myself, "This is it, Sarah. Today's the day." The dress hung on the closet door, ivory lace with a simple cut I had chosen because it felt like me, nothing extravagant, nothing to impress anyone else. I knew some people expected a bride to look like she had stepped out of a fashion magazine, but I wasn't that kind of woman. Jason loved me in my simplest form, and that thought gave me strength. Still, the pit in my stomach told me the day would not unfold without conflict. I wasn't wrong. As my maid of honor, my best friend Rachel, helped me into the dress, she tried to distract me with jokes. "Sarah, you're glowing. Forget a wedding dress. You could wear a potato sack and Jason would still cry when he sees you." I laughed nervously, but deep inside, I knew Rachel was trying to ease the tension she felt too. She had been around my family long enough to know that my mom wasn't the type to let big moments pass without a cutting remark. Sure enough, it came sooner than expected. When my mom walked in to check on me, her eyes skimmed over my dress, and instead of smiling, she pursed her lips. "That's the one you chose?" she asked flatly. "It looks fine, I suppose. A little plain." I froze for a second, then forced a smile. "Yes, Mom. It's the one I wanted." Rachel's hand lingered on my shoulder like silent backup, but I knew she couldn't intervene. Mom had always been quick with comments that stung, and today, apparently, wasn't going to be different. We made it to the church on time, but the car ride itself was a test of patience. Mom sat beside me in the back seat, her perfume strong, her presence heavier than the lace around me. She tapped her nails on her phone screen, scrolling through messages, while making offhand comments like, "I still think your sister would have chosen a more flattering style," and, "Don't slouch, it makes the dress look worse." I bit my lip until I tasted a hint of blood. I reminded myself that today wasn't about her. Today was about Jason and me. But the truth was, I had grown up with years of this kind of treatment, and part of me feared that no matter how happy I tried to be, Mom would find a way to ruin it. When we arrived, guests were already filing into the pews. I peeked out the car window and saw familiar faces, neighbors, co-workers, distant relatives. A blend of smiles and whispers filled the air. My heart raced faster. Inside, the florist's arrangements filled the church with the smell of roses and baby's breath. Candles flickered softly, casting a warm glow on the aisle that I'd soon walk down. For a brief moment, I let myself breathe in the beauty of it. But then I caught sight of Mom speaking to my aunt near the front row. Her head tilted in my direction, and both of them shook their heads with knowing smirks. I told myself to focus on Jason. Jason had always been my anchor, the one person who looked at me without judgment. He didn't care about my family's constant criticisms, or how I wasn't the daughter my mom seemed to want. He loved me as I was. Thinking of him standing at the altar gave me the strength to keep walking forward, even though my stomach churned like I'd swallowed stones. The ceremony began, and for the first 10 minutes, everything was picture perfect. The music swelled, the pastor spoke with warmth, and guests leaned in with hopeful smiles. Jason's eyes locked with mine, steady and reassuring. I felt like maybe, just maybe, we could have the day we dreamed of. But the weight of Mom's presence lingered. I could see her stiff posture in the front pew, her lips pressed thin, her eyes scanning me as though she were waiting for a mistake. Every glance in her direction reminded me that peace never lasted long with her. During the exchange of vows, my voice trembled slightly. I wasn't nervous about marrying Jason. I was nervous about what might come next. My mind flashed back to my teenage years when Mom told me no one would ever put up with me. Or the time in college when she dismissed my accomplishments, saying they weren't impressive enough. That same judgmental energy was radiating off her now. Even as the rings slid onto our fingers, and applause filled the church, I couldn't shake the shadow of her disapproval. It felt like a storm cloud hanging just outside the window, threatening to roll in at any moment. The reception was set in the church's fellowship hall, decorated with string lights and modest table settings. It wasn't a lavish event, but it felt cozy and intimate, something Jason and I both wanted. Friends laughed over plates of food, kids ran in little circles near the dessert table, and music played softly in the background. I sat at the head table beside Jason, trying to soak in the joy. He leaned over and whispered, "You look beautiful, Sarah. Don't let anyone steal this from you." His words calmed me, but my eyes wandered to Mom again. She was quiet, sipping her wine, her expression unreadable. Rachel gave me a subtle nod from across the room, a reminder that I wasn't alone. Still, I couldn't ignore the way my mother's silence seemed louder than all the music and laughter combined. Little did I know, that silence was just the calm before the storm. As I sipped from my glass and prepared myself for the toasts, I felt a shift in the air, a tension building like static electricity before lightning strikes. Deep down, I knew my mom's moment was coming, and when it did, it would change everything. The room buzzed with soft chatter, forks clinking against plates, and the laughter of children darting around the tables. But beneath the cheerful noise, I could feel it, the weight of my mother's silence pressing like a heavy stone against my chest. She sat stiffly, her glass of wine cradled between two fingers, her lips drawn in a line so tight it could have cut glass. I tried to ignore her. I really did. I leaned toward Jason, whispered a small joke about how our nephew was piling cake so high it might topple, and he chuckled, squeezing my hand. For a few moments, I let myself believe maybe I was overthinking it. Maybe Mom would sit quietly, behave herself, and let me have one good day. But then it happened. The microphone had just been passed to Rachel, my maid of honor. She stood up, radiant in her pale blue dress, and began a heartfelt toast. "Sarah has always been more than a best friend to me," she said warmly. "She's the sister I got to choose. And Jason, I've never seen her light up the way she does when she's with you." The crowd smiled, clapping gently as Rachel dabbed at her eyes. I squeezed Jason's hand, feeling tears prickle behind my lashes. It was the kind of moment every bride dreams of, being seen, being celebrated. And that's when my mother rose to her feet. The scrape of her chair against the floor echoed louder than it should have, silencing laughter mid-breath. She didn't wait for the microphone. Her voice cut through the air, sharp and merciless. "She doesn't deserve him." Every sound in the room died. Even the children froze, sensing the shift in energy. I felt my body go cold, my fingers numb against Jason's palm. Mom's chin lifted, her eyes sweeping the room as if daring anyone to challenge her. "Jason could have done so much better," she continued, her tone dripping with disdain. "He is a kind, hard-working man, and she jabbed a finger in my direction, is nothing but a mistake I should have corrected years ago." A low gasp rippled through the hall. Someone dropped a fork. It clattered against porcelain. My aunt shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her eyes darting to the floor. But my cousin smirked, like this was entertainment. My chest tightened. I wanted to melt into the floor, disappear, anything but stand there with dozens of eyes burning holes into me. Jason gripped my hand tighter, grounding me. His lips moved, barely audible. "Don't let her break you." But the words struggled to reach me through the pounding in my ears. Rachel's face had gone pale, her toast forgotten. She glanced at me helplessly, then at Jason, as though begging him to intervene. I swallowed hard, forcing air into my lungs, but the humiliation cut deeper with every second. Memories of Mom's cruelty flashed in my mind, every insult, every dismissal, every time she made me feel like nothing. But this, doing it on the one day meant to be about joy and love. It was cruelty wrapped in performance. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. Then came the whispers. "She really said that," someone muttered. "Unbelievable," another voice hissed. A chair squeaked as one of Jason's relatives leaned forward, eyes narrowed at my mom. I forced myself to look around. Half the room looked horrified, their eyes darting between me and Mom like they couldn't believe what they'd just witnessed. But a few faces, my uncle, my cousin, even my own father, they didn't look surprised. They looked complicit. Quiet approval, hidden behind lowered gazes and smirks. That hurt more than the outburst itself. Jason straightened, his jaw clenched. I could feel his body tense beside me, like he was holding himself back from saying something he'd regret. But still, he didn't let go of my hand. I found my voice, though it shook as I whispered, "Why now, Mom?" Her head whipped toward me, her eyes narrowing like daggers. "Because somebody has to tell the truth," she snapped, her voice carrying across the stunned hall. "And the truth is, you are ungrateful, selfish, and not worth the man sitting beside you." The words hit like blows. Jason pushed back his chair slightly, but before he could rise, my sister let out a soft laugh from across the table. That laugh, smug, knowing, stung worse than anything else. She leaned in to whisper something to her husband, and I caught the faintest smirk on his lips. It was clear, they weren't shocked. They were entertained. A fire lit in my chest, burning through the humiliation. I had been embarrassed, yes, but in that moment, something inside me shifted. My whole life I had swallowed her words, buried them deep, convinced myself that if I stayed quiet, I could keep the peace. But now, she had taken my peace, ripped it apart in front of everyone I loved. The guests sat frozen, unsure whether to clap back at her cruelty or pretend it hadn't happened. The music had cut off long ago, leaving only the harsh sound of my mother's breathing and the faint buzz of the microphone left abandoned on the table. Jason finally stood. His height cast a shadow over her, and for the first time that night, her lips parted, just slightly, like she hadn't expected him to rise against her. But he didn't speak yet. He simply placed his hand on my shoulder, steady and reassuring, and looked directly at her. And though no words had been spoken, I knew this wasn't going to end the way she thought. But in that moment, I sat there trembling, the sting of her words seared into my skin. The damage had been done. The whispers, the smirks, the gasps, all of it played like a cruel chorus in my head. And yet, beneath it all, a new strength began to form, rising quietly, waiting for its moment. The night had shifted. The outburst was no longer just an embarrassment. It was the spark that would unravel everything she had tried to control. And I, for the first time in my life, was ready to watch it burn. Jason stepped forward and took the microphone with a steady hand. The crowd leaned closer without meaning to, as if silence itself had suddenly become valuable. He glanced at me for just a second, his eyes warm but steady, then fixed his gaze on my mother. His voice was calm and clear, the kind of calm that makes people sit up straighter. "I need to say something," he began. "I promised Sarah I wouldn't spoil today, but this matters more than avoiding discomfort." A ripple passed through the room. Chairs shifted. Glasses clinked as people tried to disguise their unease. Jason didn't let the sound distract him. He told them about a meeting 2 months earlier at a coffee shop on Main Street. He described the corner booth, the chalkboard menu, the mismatched chairs, and the waitress with chipped nail polish who refilled cups without asking. He said my mother had arrived in a beige coat, her scarf tucked neatly, her posture crisp. She sat down, folded her hands, and slid a small envelope across the table. My stomach knotted as he spoke. I had no idea such a meeting had ever taken place. Jason's words came slow, deliberate. He said my mother's smile had been polite but cold. She had praised him at first, called him ambitious and a decent man. Then she leaned in and lowered her voice. "There's a simpler way," she told him. "Take this envelope. Walk away before it gets worse. You'll thank me one day." The reception hall went still. Someone coughed in the back, a brittle sound against the silence. My aunt's hand flew to her chest. My sister's smirk faded to a thin line. Jason reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope, creased from being carried. He held it high so everyone could see. "This is what she gave me," he said. "And I refused." The room collectively exhaled. I recognized my mother's handwriting immediately, a looping initial on the flap, the same script I'd seen on every birthday card and school permission slip she'd ever signed. My mother stiffened. Her wine glass rattled against the table. "That is a lie," she snapped, her voice sharp enough to cut. He is trying to humiliate me in front of my family. My father stood halfway, his hands raised weakly. Enough, he said. This isn't appropriate. Let's not ruin the evening. His voice lacked conviction. His attempt to smooth things over fell flat, exposing his reluctance to confront the truth. Jason didn't falter. He explained why he had refused. He said he loved me too much to let money define our future. He described the quiet nights we'd shared when rent was tight, but I still baked cookies for our sick neighbor. He recalled the time I gave up my weekend to help a coworker move when no one else showed up. He told them I never sought recognition, that my kindness came naturally, not from a desire to impress. As he spoke, I felt heat sting my eyes. These were small, ordinary moments, things I barely remembered. Yet hearing them spoken aloud, in this place, gave them weight. They weren't just memories anymore. They were proof of the person I was, standing against the image my mother had tried to paint. Jason's voice hardened slightly. I grew up around people who always took the easy way out. I learned what that led to. I won't start my marriage on those terms. His hand trembled faintly, but his words did not. The pastor, visibly uncomfortable, stepped forward. Perhaps we should verify, he suggested gently. Jason passed him the envelope. Guests craned their necks as the pastor slid it open. Inside were folded bills and a small bank receipt with my mother's handwriting scrawled across the back. Gasps rippled through the room. My mother's face went pale, then flushed crimson. This is fabricated, she said quickly, her voice pitched higher than usual. He forged this to make me look bad. A brittle laugh burst from my sister. Exactly, she said. Who carries around something like that? It's ridiculous. Her words rang hollow, brittle as glass. Her husband shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact. Whispers spread. Neighbors who had known us for years exchanged glances heavy with judgment. My father sank back into his chair, his silence louder than any defense he could have given. Jason stepped closer to me and wrapped his hand over mine. His grip was steady, grounding me. He didn't raise his voice or argue further. He simply let the evidence rest on the table, undeniable. An older neighbor stood, his voice firm but quiet. Is this true? He asked my mother directly. The question cut sharper than any accusation. My mother's lips parted, then closed. For a moment, she looked almost small, caught without the armor of her usual authority. Her eyes flicked to mine, pleading silently for rescue. She wanted me to speak, to smooth things over, to defend her as I had so many times before. But I stayed silent. My silence was not weakness. It was choice. She tried again, shifting tone. Her anger softened into wounded dignity. You're tearing this family apart, she told Jason, her voice shaking. All for the sake of a stunt. Her words reached toward sympathy, but the crowd didn't lean her way. I studied the faces around me, neighbors, friends, distant cousins. Some looked ashamed for believing her lies for so long. Others looked at me with new respect, as though seeing me clearly for the first time. Jason kept his arm firm around my waist. This isn't about tearing families apart, he said gently. It's about starting ours with honesty. His words settled over me like a protective blanket. For years, I had let my mother dictate the narrative. Her disapproval, her control, her judgment. In that moment, I saw how fragile her authority was when faced with truth. The envelope lay between us, simple paper and ink, but it carried the weight of a lifetime. With it, Jason had dismantled her illusion, exposing what she had tried to hide. And as the room absorbed the revelation, I felt something shift inside me. For the first time in years, I wasn't the one standing on trial. The spotlight had turned, and she was the one caught in its harsh glare. The envelope still lay on the table, silent but powerful, its edges curling under the weight of so many eyes. No one reached for it. No one dared move it. It sat there like a witness, unshaken by excuses or denial. I could feel my pulse in my fingertips, sharp and insistent, but for the first time, it didn't feel like fear. It felt like release. The whispers started quietly, rippling through the hall like wind weaving through tall grass. Some turned to one another, eyes wide with disbelief. Others shook their heads slowly, as though everything they'd suspected but never voiced had finally been confirmed. A cousin leaned toward her husband, muttering, "She really did it." His eyes darted away, unwilling to look at me. At the center of it all, my mother sat frozen, her face taut, her jaw clenched. She wasn't used to silence that wasn't hers to command. I watched her grip her napkin, twisting it until the fabric frayed. Her shoulders rose and fell in shallow breaths. She looked like she was waiting for someone, anyone, to step in and pull her back to safety. But no one did. The tension broke when my uncle, a man usually careful with his words, stood and cleared his throat. "I always wondered," he said slowly, his eyes never leaving my mother, "why you pushed so hard, why you never seemed satisfied with Sarah. Maybe now I understand." His voice wasn't angry, but it carried weight. His wife nodded faintly, her lips pressed tight. Murmurs grew louder. My father rubbed his temples and avoided looking at anyone. His silence felt louder than shouting. He'd chosen his side by not choosing at all, and people noticed. My sister, always ready to twist the knife, smirked across the table. "Don't act so surprised," she said, her tone laced with venom. She was just trying to save Jason from making the biggest mistake of his life. She glanced at me, smug and satisfied, waiting for me to crack. Jason didn't give her the satisfaction. He turned his gaze directly on her, his jaw set. "You laughed when your mother insulted Sarah earlier," he said evenly. "Now you defend this. That says more about you than it does about her." His words weren't loud, but the room heard them. The smirk vanished. Her cheeks flushed, and she shifted uncomfortably in her seat. For once, she had no clever retort. I felt the shift then, the weight in the room turning, bending, no longer pressing down on me. People were beginning to see my mother and sister not as victims of my supposed failures, but as architects of cruelty. The balance had tilted, and I was no longer the one standing in judgment. A few guests, maybe emboldened by Jason's steady tone, began to clap softly. At first it was awkward, hesitant, but then it grew. More hands joined, hesitant claps turning into firm applause. It wasn't wild or celebratory. It was supportive, a kind of recognition I hadn't known I needed until that moment. I swallowed hard, emotions crashing against each other inside me. Relief, anger, gratitude, they all pulsed together, overwhelming and raw. My eyes blurred, but I refused to let tears fall. Not tonight. Not here. My mother finally stood, her chair scraping harshly against the floor. "This is all manipulation," she declared, her voice trembling with effort. "You're all being fooled." She looked around, seeking agreement, but found only weary stares. Her authority had slipped, and no one was rushing to catch it for her. She turned to my father, her voice sharper now. "Say something," she demanded. But he stayed seated, his gaze fixed on the table. He lifted his glass and drank instead of speaking. That silence cut deeper than anything he could have said. Jason's hand tightened around mine. He leaned close and whispered, "You don't have to carry this anymore." His words settled into me, not as comfort but as truth. He was right. The hold my mother had over me was breaking, not because she had changed, but because everyone else could finally see her clearly. The applause slowed, fading into a quiet that felt lighter than before. A friend of mine, someone who'd known me since high school, raised her glass. "To Sarah," she said, her voice steady, for standing tall when others tried to keep her small. Glasses lifted around the room. Some guests joined boldly, others more reluctantly, but they joined. The toast wasn't just for me. It was against everything my mother had tried to do. My mother's lips pressed into a thin line, fury simmering beneath her forced composure. She sat back down, her hands folded tightly, her eyes fixed on her plate as though it might swallow her whole. She didn't speak again. I looked around the room, really looked, and for the first time, I felt seen. Not as the girl my mother had painted me to be, but as myself. The clapping, the toasts, the small nods of encouragement, they stitched something back together inside me. Pieces I hadn't realized were broken began to fit again. My breath steadied. My shoulders eased. I realized I wasn't standing in her shadow anymore. The truth had dragged her control into the open, and once exposed, it lost its power. The night carried on, but everything had shifted. Conversations resumed, lighter now, tinged with relief. Laughter returned in cautious bursts, gradually growing louder. People avoided my mother's table, drifting toward ours instead. Her isolation was stark, a punishment delivered without words. Jason leaned close, his lips brushing my ear. "This is your turning point," he murmured. "Don't ever forget this feeling." I wouldn't. I knew it in my bones. Something fundamental had changed, not just in how others saw me, but in how I saw myself. For the first time, I wasn't defined by her judgment. I was defined by my own resilience. And that realization was more powerful than any apology she could have offered. The silence that followed still felt thick, like smoke after a fire. My hands trembled, not from fear anymore, but from the weight of everything that had unfolded. I stood at the edge of a life I no longer wanted to be defined by my mother's cruelty or by the whispers of judgment that had filled that hall. For the first time in years, I realized I had a choice, and I was going to take it. I didn't wait for applause or for someone to tell me what a brave thing I had done. Instead, I took a step back, feeling the fabric of my dress drag gently against the floor. My heart pounded as if reminding me, "This is your moment, don't waste it." I looked at Ethan, his eyes wide, searching for mine, almost as if asking what came next. But I didn't have an answer yet. I just knew I couldn't let this day, my wedding day, be remembered only for pain. "Claire," Ethan whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "Whatever you want to do, I'm with you." Those words steadied me. No promises of fixing everything, no dramatic gestures. Just a simple truth. I wasn't alone anymore, not unless I chose to be. I turned back to the crowd, my mother still frozen in her chair, lips pressed thin as if holding back more poison. But she stayed quiet now. Maybe the shock of being exposed had finally closed her throat, or maybe she just realized she had no more power here. Either way, I refused to give her another second of my energy. "I think we've had enough speeches for today," I said, forcing my voice to stay calm, even light. "This wedding doesn't need to be about arguments or secrets. It needs to be about choice. And I'm making mine right here." A murmur rolled through the guests. Some nodded, some looked uncomfortable, others curious. I could almost hear their thoughts. Is she walking away? Is she calling it off? I glanced at Ethan again. His hand reached out, steady, patient. And in that moment, I decided. "I choose love," I said firmly, placing my hand in his. Not the kind that demands I prove myself, not the kind that comes with conditions or comparisons. I choose love that sees me, even when others don't. The words surprised even me. They weren't rehearsed or planned, but they were mine. For once, I wasn't speaking to defend myself or to fight back against my mother's cruelty. I was speaking because I believed in what I was saying. Ethan pulled me closer, and for a moment, the room faded. I didn't care about the whispers, the stares, or the people who had secretly enjoyed watching me be torn down. All I cared about was the clarity rushing through me. But clarity doesn't erase pain. As we stood there, the image of my mother's face wouldn't leave my mind. I thought of the years I spent chasing her approval, every report card, every achievement, every desperate attempt to hear "I'm proud of you." None of it had ever been enough. And today, she had proved once and for all that it never would be. "Claire," my Aunt Linda's voice cut through the air gently. "You don't owe anyone here an explanation. Do what makes you happy." It startled me, hearing support in a room where I'd expected silence. Aunt Linda rarely stood up to my mother, but her words felt like a small anchor dropped into the storm. I nodded at her, grateful, though my throat was too tight to respond. The officiant cleared his throat. "Would you like to continue the ceremony?" he asked cautiously. I looked at Ethan again. He smiled, not pushing, just waiting. And for the first time all day, I smiled back without hesitation. "Yes," I said simply. "But this time, it's on my terms." The ceremony resumed, though it no longer felt like the same event we had started. The vows we exchanged weren't scripted. I spoke from the raw place inside me, promising not perfection, but presence. promising to choose each other even when the world doubted us. And Ethan's words mirrored mine, simple, real, unpolished, but exactly what I needed. When the rings slipped onto our fingers, I felt something shift deep inside me. Not magic, not a fairy tale ending, just a quiet strength, the kind that comes from finally deciding to live for yourself. The guests clapped, some genuinely, others politely. My mother didn't move. She sat rigid, staring ahead, as though the whole event had betrayed her. But I didn't let her ruin what came next. As Ethan and I walked down the aisle together, I whispered to him, "We're not starting our marriage with her shadow hanging over us. Things are going to change." He squeezed my hand. "Then let's make that change together." The reception wasn't perfect. There were awkward silences, a few guests who left early, and moments where I felt the sting of everything that had happened. But there were also small, unexpected joys. My cousin pulled me aside to say how proud she was of me. A friend from college hugged me tight and whispered, "You showed more strength today than most people show in a lifetime." Those moments mattered more than the stares or the gossip. Later that night, when Ethan and I finally slipped away, I stood by the window of our room, looking out at the quiet street below. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like a daughter scrambling for approval. I felt like a woman who had chosen her own path. I turned to Ethan and said softly, "This isn't the ending, it's just the start." He wrapped his arms around me, his forehead resting against mine. "And this time," he whispered, "it's your story, Claire. No one else's." I closed my eyes, letting the words sink in. They weren't dramatic, but they were true. And truth was what I had been searching for all along. That night, I made a silent promise to myself. No more living in shadows. No more bending just to fit someone else's idea of who I should be. From now on, my choices, my love, my voice, my path, belong to me. And for the first time in forever, that felt enough.